Hello, everyone, and greeting. Keith here from Gravitas, and we'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, either live or on the tape version of this webinar. Today, we have a guest speaker and interacting with Thresette Briggs. Thresette is the Chief Performance Officer at P3 Consulting, based out of Indianapolis, Indiana, with offices in Roanoke, Virginia. She focuses on helping develop leaders, particularly in the area today. We'll be talking about creating diversity and diverse cultures. Thresette is well accomplished in her career with her bachelor's degree from Wichita State University and also a master's degree. And a little known fact about Thresette that I'm coming to appreciate is she also holds 2 service patents from the United States Patent Office. So she's an innovative thinker, a great speaker and leader. Thresette, welcome to the webinar today.
Well, thank you, Keith. It's great to be here again, and welcome everyone. It's so great to join you today.
Excellent. And what I'd like to do for the audience listening in live or on the recording is really just make this a conversation back and forth on some key topics, questions that we developed with the thought in mind, as a CEO, president, general manager, or managing director, listening in today, tackling the topic of diversity and creating high performance cultures. And Thresette, with that, before we jump into my first question, any other opening comments you'd like to set the stage for the business leaders before we roll up our sleeves?
I think the only thing I'd add is lean in, really lean in and absorb the information and see how it might be able to be beneficial to you as you think about potential gaps in this area in your organization. So I would suggest that.
Okay, excellent. And again, we want to make this very practical. At the end, we're going to talk about a tool that Thresette can utilize with organizations too, to really make it practical as follow-up. But let's have a spirit of learning, everyone, as well as curiosity. So put your questions into chat, and I've got plenty of questions to ask too. So let me start with the first one, Thresette. The term diversity worldwide, and we're speaking now here in North America, can create a lot of different definitions in people's minds and different perspectives. When you think about diversity, bring us to a common denominator. How would you define diversity so that we have a working definition we can all latch onto?
Absolutely, and that is so very important. So let me start, Keith, by sharing some slides that you will need. Hopefully everyone can see that.
Okay, we can see it.
All right, great. So, when you think about what diversity really means, there's so many definitions out there. And it can get kind of confusing because if you Google the word diversity, you probably get about a gazillion responses. And there's different definitions, for all sorts of different organizations. So again, it gets pretty confusing. But the dictionary definition, there's a scholarly definition, and so many others. So what I've learned is that the simplest answer is generally the best answer. And so what diversity really means is differences. The different thoughts, the different perspectives, the different opinions, the different backgrounds, the different cultures that we all have. It goes way beyond race, which is one that certainly has been a big topic over the last couple of years, but it goes way beyond that. There's so many diversity dimensions that we couldn't even have time to talk about them all. But the short answer is different. And we're all different. Even if we might look the same, we have different thoughts, we have different cultures and backgrounds. So it's important to think about it in those terms. Now, it's a fact, we're different even if we look similar. So I want to make sure that I emphasize it's important to think about differences versus just the race dimension or any other of the multiple dimensions of diversity. A couple of other things that I want to share too. As you think about diversity, here's a couple of things I want to share regarding why this is important to think about and how it leverages your employees to help you build a high-performing culture. So as you look at these graphs, you see that on the right side, you have a homogeneous team. Everybody's the same, they're all in the same corner. They're probably able to get to decisions pretty quickly. However, when you look at that side, you see a big gap, you see a big problem space. And why is it a problem space? Because there's nothing there. And so you have everybody thinking the same, but you don't necessarily have all the creativity and innovation you might need because everybody is thinking the same. When you look at the one on the right side, it demonstrates what a diverse team can do for you. You've got people on the left side, in the middle, on the right side. And what has that done? That has covered that open space. And so it's created what you need to make sure that you have all the innovation and creativity that you could possibly have. So it's important for so many reasons, but the difference is what we need to think about, not just one of the dimensions.
And Thresette, a question here, a little bit deeper on this. When we talk about the cultures that are willing to tackle diversity and use the differences for the good of the culture, which we're going to get to in a little bit, it strikes me that the security of the culture, having a secure, safe culture, the leader feeling secure is really, really important in order to create the space to step into allowing people to share their differences. Any thoughts or insights on that?
Mm-hmm. And so your question is about the leader feeling safe. Is that what I understood you to say?
The leader as well as the team around them that will contribute the differences in opinion, of course.
Absolutely. It's very important that everybody in this conversation feels like they're part of it. And that's one of the really, really things I want to emphasize today is that difference piece, it includes everybody. Now, this quote from Cynthia Burke, she's a Chief People and Culture Officer at Genentech, and this is from their D&I report in 2020. And as you see the words that are bolded there, those are the important words to think about. Inclusive, impacts every aspect of business, greater sense of belonging, diverse viewpoints, new innovations, directly addresses the needs of the patients they serve. So they're working hard to make sure everyone has a voice in that conversation. And that's to your point, Keith, everybody in this conversation has to feel that they have a voice and can speak to it. Some of my white male colleagues have shared with me that they don't feel like they're part of diversity. And I love to have that conversation with them because I help them see everybody is part of this. And this is why. You have a diverse opinion, you have a diverse perspective, you have diverse thoughts, you have a diverse background. Now, not everybody feels comfortable in this polarized society we're in saying what they need to say. And that's why creating environments where those good conversations can happen is important. It's very, very important. You have to have a tool or way to have those conversations well. And then you also have to be self-aware so you understand what might be something you need to improve so you can have a better conversation. And everybody feels like they can be part of that. I hope that answered your question because that one is the biggest one I'm finding right now with clients and people that I'm working with. I'm afraid to say something because I'm going to offend someone, because I'm going to get in trouble, because our company is going to get blasted. And those things could happen if you don't take some steps to be more aware, self-aware, and then to put tools in place so people can have productive conversations.
And we're going to get into some of those deeper dialogues here in a little bit. One other thing I'll mention is we utilize a fair amount of Pat Lencioni's work on building trust and teamwork. And the 5 dysfunctions of a team comes to mind here too. And on the bottom of the pyramid of 5 dysfunctions is indeed trust. And then on trust, you can build the ability to have healthy conflict. So it's very important to get the environment correct first.
Yes, the relationship is the key. For example, a friend of mine, he and I had very different views on a lot of things, but we are friends and we've been friends for over 10 years. And so we were able to have a very difficult conversation because I trust him, he trusts me, and we have a relationship. It's harder to do that with people you don't have that trust in that relationship with. So that's why building those is so very critically important.
Okay, so kind of foundation number one, create the environment to everybody has differences, but create the environment where you can safely share your differences and learn from one another. And
Yes.
so let's now ask Thresette. The next question is, well, what is the business case for high performing cultures and diversity differences? How do differences contribute to the performance on the business side of a culture that's safe?
Okay. Well, and you know, I want to, before I go into that, I want to also share that that friend and I that had that conversation, we decided to develop a tool. That tool is called SAFE, and it helps people to have productive conversations. And so not only do you have to have trust in a relationship, but you have to have some sort of tool to help you if you're not comfortable having these conversations. Mm-hmm. It's not just the trust in relationship, it's what's a structure to help me do this. So that's important too. But once you have that trust and relationship, or at least an environment where you can have a pretty good conversation, you have to understand first, what is the reason that we're doing this? You know, so what's the reason that diversity is important? How is that going to help us build a high performing culture? And what's it going to do for business performance? So let me share a few things. That's a multifaceted answer there. So I want to share these studies that are very, very compelling. This study of 366 companies was done by McKinsey and Company. And the diversity, there's a dividend. And it asks you the question, what's the likelihood that companies in the top quartile for diversity financially outperform those in the bottom quartile? And so as you look at this, you see the companies that are 35%, that are racially and ethnically diverse, are 35% more likely to outperform those in the bottom quartile, those who aren't. And then looking on the gender diverse side, those who have that gender diversity are 15% more likely to outperform. So it builds a compelling business case. And it's important to understand a couple of things. Greater diversity doesn't necessarily equal causation or that your company will high perform. Mm-hmm. But this link indicates that those who are more successful are committed to diverse leadership, and they are more successful. So if you want to take a look too at how it supports innovation, here's a study that was done on that. This one shows that companies with above average diversity report 45% average innovation revenue, 45%. And then companies with below average diversity scores, 26% average innovation. And this is based on this Blau index, which is a diversity index that's typically used in social and policy analysis. And this study, this intricate study, shows what diversity can also do for innovation. These companies leverage diversity of thought, of backgrounds, of cultures, of opinions, of worldviews, and they put those into strategic planning. They put those into brainstorming sessions. They put those into team meetings and all the other places that you need to have diversity. So we also want to take a look at how it helps you from a gender and a millennial perspective. So this is another study. This is the last study. But this one shows you, as I shared earlier, you want to leverage all the dimensions of diversity. You don't want to just focus on race. And that's where it gets even more uncomfortable, I think, as people focus on just that one. There is a lot of things that need to be worked on there, but that is not the only one you can leverage. So if you leverage all of these things and remember that there's so many diversity dimensions you can tap into, you can have a much better chance of having higher business performance. But two that you want to have on your mind at all times, especially now, is the millennial part and the gender on different boards. As you see here, 75% of the global workforce is going to be made up of millennials by 2025. That means millennials are going to be making the decisions that impact us all. And then 74% believe that if their organization is more innovative, it has a culture of inclusion. And that's what drives the innovation. Older generations sometimes focus more on the lens of race, demographics, equality, and representation. But millennials do not necessarily think that way. So it's important to understand what the leaders of tomorrow are thinking about. And then as you look at the gender on board, it shows you that board diversity, gender, and race, of course, 28% more likely to outperform their peers. So you want to definitely, not only the race, not only the dimension that everybody's talking about, you want to look and make sure that you focus on the millennial, the gender, the different cultures, different viewpoints, and all the things that you could potentially leverage to make your organization successful.
Hey, Thresette, what you shared a moment ago on innovation, could we go back one slide and I'd like your insight? So when we talk about companies that are diverse and allow the voice of differences within the culture, they're going to outperform their peers relative to revenue innovation. How much of that do you think is getting the product design right because you have differences in diversity and design of the product versus, or in addition to, accessing new markets or markets that will be more friendly to your products and services because you are employing the differences of diversity? Any insights between the two? Is one more than the other, or thoughts there?
You know, and I want to break that apart a little. I think that it's really all of those things, Keith. I think it's important to understand that all those could be factors. But if you have, for example, if you have people who think the same and pretty much have the same viewpoint, they're going to get to decisions faster. But when you have people who have diverse viewpoints, it might take a little more time, but that end product is probably going to be much more innovative and creative because you've got different thought processes and perspectives that went into it. And so all of those things that you just said are really part of why this holds true, that 45% average innovation with people who have average, above average diversity scores versus 26% for below average diversity scores, because it's hard to break out of the same if you don't have something in there to shake that up a little bit. And so you don't get new thought processes and new perspectives into developing things, and you just kind of get stagnant.
What's coming to mind, to add a little bit of humor here, Thresette, I can imagine having some of my friends over and designing a appliance for our kitchen without my wife's input. I can assure you that would not end well, because we would probably design something very efficient and elegant that was just not as practical and useful for the head cook in the house, so to speak. So
exactly, and that's a great point. I mean, it's like some of the boards and the different places I serve or in organizations I work with. I had a client and we were talking about recruiting, and I used the example of, say you have a client who says, I don't want to work with an African-American person. What are you going to do? What are you going to say? Are you going to risk losing that client, or are you going to say, we believe that diversity gives us creativity and innovation and has helped our company be more successful? So you have to challenge people to think differently, because they won't unless there is either a reason to, or they're forced to in some cases. But it would probably come out, if somebody tried to do that in my kitchen without my input, it would probably come out kind of the same.
Right. Well, you
got to shake that up, and you got to help people think about things that they have not thought about.
Well, and that's part of the beauty of, for the listening audience, one reason that Trissette and I have connected so well on this is we can take it back to the business case, and the business case is solid. If you get people with differences looking into product design, market penetration, all aspects, you're going to have a richer outcome, and you're going to outperform your competitors, as we see here on the slide. So.
Exactly. So you've got to to that point, Keith, you've got to look at your recruiting process. You've got to look at your compensation philosophy. You've got to look at how you normally involve people in things. You've got to look at all the different pieces of your organization. And is there a diversity mindset included in that? The one thing that's important is that everybody has to be part of this. It isn't something that you want to do on the side and check the box. It is something that you want to integrate into all the different pieces and aspects of your business. Mm-hmm. If it's going to be successful and if it's going to produce the types of results that you see on these slides.
And so that will lead to our next big picture question. So foundation one, having a culture that will receive the desire to build diversity and honor differences, a safe, trusting culture. Number two, the business case is clear. It's in front of us now. So to your point, Trissette just made, what are the barriers? Why, what are the barriers in the leaders' minds in the organization that prevents organizations from stepping into diversity to unlock differences to become more high performance?
Well, I over my years working in this area, and I've been doing this since, 94. I didn't just start it last year. You see a lot of people coming into this arena now. But those of us who've been around a while, the common theme is that it is mindset. It's the biggest challenge to leaders, truly leveraging diversity and helping it and using it to help them build high-performing cultures is their mindset. Their mindset is blocked by some barriers, such as some of these that are on this slide here. Mm-hmm. You've got discomfort. I'm uncomfortable with something that I've never done before that I don't feel is something I want to do. You've got blind spots. You've got the belief that it doesn't apply. And that's the one I mentioned earlier, why it's so important to understand that it does apply to everyone. Because if we feel it doesn't apply to us, then we tend to ignore it or overlook it. And we don't do what we ignore. Mm-hmm. So some sort of belief that it doesn't apply. Fear is a huge barrier. And some people don't feel like they have fear, but as they dig deep, I coach a lot of leaders, I work with a lot of leaders, and there is fear often in doing something different or shifting their leadership style. So it's affecting their ability to maximize and leverage the diversity that's around them. So I think that mindset just always seems to top the list. There's all these sub reasons, mm-hmm. but it's an issue with mindset and a barrier that's blocking. And it's generally one of these barriers, but it could be others. There's also unconscious bias, of course, but unconscious bias is caused often by a lot of these things you see on here. And we know that it's something that we aren't necessarily aware that we have. But if we don't open up and dig deep and look for it, we won't be able to figure out what's blocking us, and we're going to not be as effective as we need to be. Mm-hmm.
So Trissette, let's run with this a little bit. So thinking in terms of the leaders listening in, I kind of want to put myself in that seat and do, this isn't really a role play because it's real. Mm-hmm. So if my mindset is the challenge, okay, and in my organization, where do you start that conversation, or where would you want me as a CEO leader to be thinking to challenge my mindset? How do you open that dialogue to get them to reflect and to consider a mindset change is to their advantage? Do you utilize their team? Talk about that a little bit.
Okay. Opening up their mindset to utilize it to their advantage. One of the first things that's important for leaders to do is, and this is sort of a test. Put yourself in the most uncomfortable position that you possibly can be in. It's something that I call the uncomfort zone. We kind of know about the Twilight Zone. We remember that show. It's this weird place that we don't want to be necessarily. The uncomfort zone is I'm putting myself in an uncomfortable position to force myself to do something different, to do something about it. So if you visualize the most uncomfortable situation you could be in and intentionally put yourself in that position, what will you do to shift so you can overcome that situation? For example, if you have a team of people who are underperforming, and you have a diverse group of people on your team, but you don't want to address that, or you're uncomfortable addressing it because you're concerned that you're going to get labeled something you don't want to get labeled if you address certain things. Well, that's an uncomfortable position to be in, right? So you want to get busy preparing to do that as well as you can. How am I going to prepare for this meeting? What do I need to learn and do and grow in so I can have it well? What are some of the things that will make me ready to be able to jump into that situation and address it in the way that I need to most effectively? So that's a small one, and there may be others that you all can think of that are uncomfortable positions. The person that I mentioned earlier, the leader that I said I challenged, and I said, if someone were to ask you or say to you, I don't want to work with an African American, and she said, you convicted me because someone did ask me that. And so we got busy thinking about how she would address that situation, because that's uncomfortable. You got a multi-million-dollar client or something, and they're saying they don't want this, and you know what you need to do, but what are you going to do? How are you going to do that? So those are some thoughts. Put yourself in an uncomfortable position, but there's a difference between willingness and commitment, and you have to have both in order to do that. In order to put yourself in a position so you can grow, you have to be willing. Not only, hey, it's a great idea. You got to commit to doing everything necessary to address it. You not only have to be willing to say, I'm going to put myself in these uncomfortable positions, you actually have to do it. You have to follow through. There's a difference.
That takes courage and commitment, no doubt.
Absolutely. It takes some serious courage and commitment. But if we want our organizations to be as successful as they can be and to leverage diversity in the way we want to, then we have to think about how do we do that? We really, really have to think about how we do that.
Well, let's step into a fourth big question then, is talk about practical steps. So if I'm a CEO, president listening in today, what are some steps to step forward into the decision, the design, the commitment, and the process of creating a diverse culture?
Well, the first one is it segues from what we said. It's very much leaning in to some best practices. Like we talked about, you've got to be willing and committed to a diverse culture. Not just, we're going to do this training and then we're good. You've got to commit to what does that fully look like across the organization, and what will we need to do differently that's going to challenge everybody, that's going to make them think differently, that's likely going to cause some discomfort and some change issues, but that we need to do. You have to be willing and committed to doing just that, because it's going to shake up mindsets, comfort zones, willingness levels, commitment levels. It's going to shake up all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to go first as a leader and say, I'm going to do this, and I have the vision that I'm going to share with everyone, and I'm going to expect that everyone is part of this vision, and then follow that through. Then you have to understand as the leader, what's your baseline? Where are you with diversity, and where's your organization with diversity? And so one of the tools I use with clients who really are committed to this is intercultural development inventory. And that is a tool, and I'll share more on the next slide, but it tells you where you are on a baseline of diversity, from polarization all the way up through adaptation. And what do you need to do to shift so you can improve the interactions that you have with people, and they can be actually what you intended them to be. And then the third thing you have to do is develop a strategy. You've got to have an implementation map. Once you know where you are and you become aware as a leader, and then you assess your organization as well, where do I start? What's the first thing I do? What's the second thing I do? What's the third? And what's the timing of all of that? And I help leaders decide that and determine that and walk through that, because a lot of leaders are struggling with that right now. I touched bases with a client that initially wanted me to do a diversity training. And I said, are you sure that's what you need?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, I don't know. I said, so let's talk. So we did. I ended up working with them long-term on their full strategy to help them reach their goals. And I reached out to that client and some others lately, and I said that some people are struggling with trying to completely do this diversity. They're committed to it, they want to, but they just are struggling with steps. And so I'm going to be working with them again to make sure they stay on track, because it's just not easy if you're not in this arena, and if you are not necessarily sure what to do. Even though you have a map, you have to have help sometimes making sure you take the next correct step and do it in a way that's productive for your organization.
Mm-hmm.
So those are three things I definitely suggest that you need to do. Now, as far as the IDI, I just want to touch bases a little bit more on this. And this tool is used by Walt Disney, Disney. Walt Disney, rest in peace, has been gone for a while. But it's used by Disney, it's used by Target, it's used by Walmart, it's used by lots of global companies to help them assess where their leaders are. And this tool is one of those that I think it's not only something that gives you a diagnosis, it gives you a prescription for what to do next. It tells you where you are, and then it gives you a prescription, a tool that helps you do a development plan that's going to really help you shift along that continuum and have different interactions effectively, so that you and your teams are more effective, because you're more aware of what you're doing or not doing that's having the impact you intended or not having the impact you intended. So the goal is to ensure that intent versus impact actually match. So you can have improved relationships, more team building, higher productivity, innovation, higher performing cultures, and you build that trust in those relationships that are needed to do this very important work.
Thresette, I'd like to now turn to a few scenarios and then come back and loop through some of the things that you've shared. A lot of curiosity on, you'd mentioned the SAFE tool. We'll come back to that in a few minutes, time permitting. But
Sure.
many organizations, so now I'm thinking in terms of the companies that we as coaches work with. And so in the leadership, and I want to give you a few scenarios here. It's not uncommon for a company to be a fast growth company in the technology arena and be very homogeneous at the leadership level. Okay, typically, late 20s, 30s, white male, just really tech savvy. What type of dialogues would you want that leadership team to have? So let's say they're growing fast, they're homogeneous. but what would you challenge them, the conversations you'd want them to have around building diversity at the leadership level and through the organization, knowing that it's technology and there tends to be a deficit of qualified female technologists right now because there's still a catch-up mode there. More and more, with 5 daughters, I can say this, more and more women are getting into technology rapidly and they're filling the pipeline for the future. But there's a deficit right now. Speak into your experience a little bit there, if you would, Thresette.
Yes. And that is very true, because in some industries, there's just not the pipeline that you hope, even if you go to all sorts of different sources that you haven't tried before. The pipeline isn't there. The key, however, is again that willingness and commitment to have a plan to do it. And then how do we, if we don't have this, if we don't have the diversity from gender, from millennial, from race, from whatever, how do we build that? So it's a good faith effort that's going to happen long term. The key is to start. And if you don't start, you won't get there. If you say, well, we just can't find them, what's the intentionality you're going to put around finding them? And if you can't readily find them, no matter how in depth you look into the sources, how will you build them? So for example, with different companies that are starting with grade school, even building relationships with kids, they're partnering with schools to build relationships, to have a pipeline to draw from. My daughter went to Purdue. Why did she go to Purdue? Purdue is a great school. But why did she go to Purdue? Because she had been going to Purdue since she was in the 7th grade for different camps and different things. And when it was time to go to college, we said, well, let's look at all these different things. She could have went to almost any school. And she said, I'm going to Purdue. We said, well, let's look. And she said, nope, I'm going to Purdue. She had a relationship. They had built that with her, and the pipeline was there. So you have to first think intentionally about, if we can't, are we truly looking at all the sources we can? Or are we looking at the usual places? Our friend's son, our somebody we know, a referral from someone who looks, thinks, acts, has the same worldview as us. You have to make sure that you are self-aware of what you're doing in that arena. And then if you truly can't find it, how do we build it?
And that may take,
you have to do those two things, really think deeply about.
And that may take time, it may take patience, it may take additional resource. You may be able to look within to find someone who's got the raw potential to develop. It really is strategic in making the decision and then working the problem through time. This is not a tactical 1-quarter item. This is a long-term strategy.
I tell people that all the time. This is not an overnight fix. This is going to be a journey. Are you committed to the journey? We've had this problem for a long time. People seem to be more committed, and I am encouraged by a lot of things. I'm discouraged by others, but I'm encouraged by a lot of things. So it is that long-term commitment. First, it's the willingness and commitment to do it. That's got to be there. Then it's making sure that the sources you're looking at aren't the same. And then you may have to build it. And how do you put together a strategy to build that and be ready to look at that long-term? Absolutely.
Okay. Let's see another scenario, and these are real life scenarios. So we are here in the Western United States, and I'm thinking of a construction company that is 4 decades old. The leadership team has some level of gender diversity, but it's still homogeneous when we talk about being Caucasian. The workforce is primarily, though, Hispanic. The people actually doing the work, and they're not represented at the leadership level relative to their voice. And I'm going to differentiate between having a seat on the leadership team and having their voice to the leadership team. Tricetta, how might a company address that so that their voice is heard and their differences are incorporated into making decisions long term? Any insights or experience you'd want to share there?
Yes, the experiences that I have working with those kinds of situations, first of all, there's probably Latino leadership organizations in different places that could be tapped into, again, to see if all the sources have been exhausted for that. Now, sure, you want to grow from within, but you may not necessarily have the competency level within in the Hispanic workforce. So are there Latina partnerships that you can have that have sources that you might not know? And is there some kind of mentoring or apprenticeship program or something, in your organization, depending on the kind of organization you have, to grow people from within? But another thing you want to do is be sure that you don't have that internally. And that is working in partnership with your HR and organizational development folks and doing some sort of assessment on the competencies that you have within your organization. You might have a jewel in a gem that you just didn't know you had, So sometimes I find, and this is something we have to challenge ourselves on as leaders, we think we don't have anybody in here. We have to really ask, is that true? And so you want to work with your folks internally, HR, organizational development, talent, whatever the title is. What are the competencies? Do we have some sort of assessment of the competencies we need for leaders to determine that we truly don't have that representation here, or we just think we don't have? So
yeah,
I would say, oh, go ahead.
I really want to highlight the jewels and gems. Having coached for 15 years and knowing coaches around the world, a lot of companies have jewels and gems they eventually find if they look beyond their current paradigm. And so I really want to affirm that perspective.
Absolutely.
Let's see, we have a question coming in regarding the IDI. So the IDI seems to be a tool that needs to be administered by a qualified person, which is true, rather than a do-it-yourself tool. How do leaders learn more about why and then how to access the IDI? Talk a little bit about that.
How do they learn more about why?
I'll interpret the chat a little bit. How does someone, if they're interested in the IDI, what's their next step, and what does the process look like of using it, and who helps them?
Great question. I would say I put the website there. I would go to the website. There's a lot of information about what it is and why it is. To your point, you do have to use a qualified administrator. I was trained, intense training to learn how to use this tool. So you do have to use a qualified administrator to administer it to an individual or a team. And it can be administered to an individual or a group, so you can see the themes of a group, which I sometimes suggest. If an individual wants to do it, they can, but often it's a team that is working on cultural competence, and everybody needs to know sort of where everyone is. So you can go and look at the website, and it has a lot of great videos and things on there that tell you about it. Yeah. And then if you want to move forward, you need to use a qualified administrator, and I would be happy to help you through that process. So feel free to reach out. I have information on my next slide of how you would reach me and set up a 30-minute to talk about, is that something that you want to move further on, or that would be beneficial to your organization. So I'm happy to have that 30-minute complimentary chat.
And so Tricetta, tell me if I'm hearing correctly then. So if I'm a leader, founder, or a leader of an organization listening in, and I'm really curious about how diversity can help me grow my company, maybe even create a competitive edge, but I'm a little scared of what that looks like and what that might be like, and even what's maybe inside of me. Are you saying they can reach out, take a look at the IDI, research it, reach out to you, and then you can confidentially help them take that first step. Is that accurate?
That is absolutely accurate. And that is what I would love to do. And I think everybody needs a safe space to do that, is to be honest about where they are and then get some help in moving forward with that willingness and commitment that's needed. Absolutely.
And
And IDI may not be what you need at this point, but it might be. So that 30 minutes, we could sort of talk about where you think you are and what really is the course you might need to take to move forward in this and do it well.
and just briefly, Thresette, what will the IDI tell you and the leader? What just a few of the insights or the highlights it will provide?
Mhm. It will provide you with where you fall on a diversity continuum that goes from, it starts with polarization or denial, or polarization, which is the far end, and all the way up to adaptation. It helps you understand where you fall, and it really goes in depth about what that means and where you are. And it's not bad or good, it's just where you are. And it's about continuous improvement and growth and development and leaning in. So it helps you to understand where you are. It really goes into depth about what that means with where you are and how it may be affecting you, as well as what it can do to help you. Another piece of it is that it provides a conflict assessment inventory. It tells you how you generally handle conflict, because when you get into these types of things, conflict generally surfaces. And if people don't understand how they handle conflict or how others around them do, then things can get pretty dicey. So, it helps you understand, are you an aggressive conflict? Do you handle it aggressively? Are you emotional? Are you something else? So it's 4 quadrants that you can see where you are and why you handle diversity that way, and then kind of manage that a little bit more effectively as a leader, understanding the different styles.
So let's say a leader leans in, takes the IDI, works with you. Would the next logical step cascade that to the leadership team and essentially repeat that process, but with the leadership team? Is that generally the journey?
It depends on the organization. Sometimes the leader may just want to do one for themselves, but if you are thinking this is going to be something you want for your leadership team, I encourage you all to do it together. Now, here's the thing that's important to understand. Each person's, even though I would see the results and the themes that the team shows, everybody would not see everybody's scores. Only I would. And I could help you determine what the themes are among the team that the team needs to work on. And then I could work with you individually to interpret what your individual results mean for you in your development. So it's a confidential assessment, and the purpose of doing a team assessment would be to highlight themes for the team, but it's confidential, and you can do it individually as well and understand your individual assessment.
Okay.
Did that answer your question, Keith?
Yes.
I hope that answered the question for everyone.
Yeah, no, that was very, very helpful. Let's see. I want to come back. I mentioned a few minutes ago the SAFE tool for creating an environment where you can have those hard but important discussions. Can you talk a little bit about that? Just kind of give us a few of the principles there.
Absolutely. SAFE is an acronym. And what it means is, first, you've got to set the tone for a good conversation, meaning you have to prepare to have this conversation. I would not encourage anyone to want to honestly have a conversation with someone, but go up to them and say, we need to talk. You're going to get, that's like the principal's office thing. So you wouldn't say that. There are other things you would say. For example, can I get your input on something? I'd like to talk to you about something that I think you would provide some great insight on. There's different ways to set the tone for a good conversation and not put the person immediately on the defense. So you want to plan for a good conversation by setting the tone, and prior to asking them, you want to have planned out what you're going to say and your thoughts. The A is for acknowledging that they're going to have a different worldview than yours. Don't go into a conversation expecting someone to win somebody over to the way you're thinking. Likely not going to happen. You have to acknowledge your worldview and be ready to listen, to understand, not listen until it's time for you to talk. You're doing all those things to make sure that you truly understand and hear their worldview. Not that you agree with it, but you want to hear it and understand who they are. Then the F is for focusing on the long-term relationship. Do you want this relationship to work? You've got to understand that everything you're doing is around that, and make sure that the long-term relationship is your end goal. And then the E is the willingness to explore alternative solutions. You might go into this thinking about one way you'd like to see it resolved, but you've got to be open to exploring alternatives together with that individual to come up with a solution that might really help that relationship grow. So that's the highlight of it. We help people figure out each of those letters and put together a plan to have good conversations with the folks that they need to. And I ask them to think about one person they need to have a conversation with, and they are scared to death, or just, this is not going to go well. How do we have them have that conversation? It's kind of like what I said earlier. Put yourself in the most uncomfortable situation. If you can do that well, man, you're going to be empowered, and you're going to be ready to move forward doing that and addressing all the different things that hopefully you need to address.
Okay, excellent. I like that acronym, and I like how you approach that. It's really being very intentional before these very sensitive conversations. And one thing I was reminded of recently is validation does not equal agreement. You can validate someone and honor them and respect their position, but it doesn't mean you have to agree with that. And I think we've lost that quite a bit in our culture, our general culture these days.
We definitely have. The polarization that we have in the world has caused people to just, it's really tough. But if you're willing to listen to people and understand where their mindset is and their thought process, and truly try to understand them, and you both do that, you're both going to feel valued, respected, like your voice was heard, and that the relationship can go a little bit further.
Yeah, the beauty of a conversation done respectfully, sincerely, is you grow together as people. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
Let's see, last question as we prepare to finish up here, and I'll take another glance if anything else is coming in question-wise. We're coming out of COVID generally. Okay, we have this thing called Omicron right now. It appears to be a little bit lighter, but how has COVID impacted the movement toward more diverse cultures? And then what do you see in 2022 and 2023? Any changes as we get back to a new normal that you would want to comment on as a thought leader in the area of diversity?
Yes, I think understanding the hybrid culture with remote workers, some off work, some at work, is going to be around for a good while. And companies have found that they can work that way and that they can be pretty productive. However, you have to really understand, how do you build community in those cultures? How do you build community, and how do you engage people effectively that way when you have all that diversity still in those hybrid cultures? So you have to not only think about how do you leverage diversity, but how do you leverage it in a hybrid culture? So I think that it's important not only to understand diversity, but understand each individual. Because I'm an African-American woman does not mean I think like every other African-American woman. It's an individual thing, right? So it's important that leaders lean in and get to know the different people on their team. If they have 50 people on their team that they have directly reporting to them, well, that's a whole structural thing that, the ratio is way off, and that's hard. That's kind of impossible for anyone. But if you have, 15 people that report to you, you want to try your best to get to know what their needs are from a diverse perspective, not only the different dimensions they have, but from a remote perspective as well. How often do they need to check in? Do you need to check in with them? How often do you need to meet? Ask them what they need. You can talk with them and you can decide some things, but one key thing is ask people, how can I best support you? They'll tell you. They will definitely tell you.
One of the greatest skills of a leader is the ability to ask the right question in the right way at the right time. So
exactly.
So Thresette, bring it all to a point now for the leaders listening in that want to take the first step and step into leveraging differences through diversity to build a better company. What parting comment or encouragement would you give them?
I would say, first of all, you just a quick summary. You've got to understand what it means, and you've got to understand that it applies to you as well as the people of color or the other people that you think diversity means. Let me reassure you, you are part of it. You've got to understand how it impacts your business performance, your innovation, and the different generations that are coming up that are going to be part of our leadership moving forward. Then you've got to address your barriers. You've got to own them. You've got to own them. And you got to lean in to do what's necessary to address them and to become more self-aware so that you don't have those gaps that potentially exist with homogeneous leadership teams and cultures. You're going to make sure that your organization is leveraging all the diversity it has. Always keep in mind, it goes way beyond race. That's one dimension. There's multiple. And if you want to talk separately, I can tell you all about them. It's so many. But use the tools you need to get more effective. Use the tools needed for your team, and reach out and ask for help. I'm here to help you if you want to have that 30-minute conversation, and we'll see where that goes. I don't, if I can help you, that's great. If I can't, I may know someone who can. So I'd be happy to talk with you. And it's been my pleasure, as always, to talk with this team, the Gravitas team, Keith, Amy, Mitch, everyone that has been so supportive. I am just great. It's just great to be part of this family. I feel like part of it.
Well, and it's wonderful to have you here. And for our listeners, we'll make sure that you have the contact information to get a hold of Thresette and find more about the IDI and to lean in. And I would leave everyone with the challenge that's running an organization, leading an organization. If you're not where you want to be yet with being able to share differences in diversity, go out 1 year in your mind, close your eyes, and what would that look like? And then journal that out and then share that with your team. So, Thresette, thank you.
I would say too, Keith, just one quick thing. What does success look like for you with diversity, to add to what you said?
Yes. Begin with the end in mind, as Dr. Covey would say. So,
yes, absolutely.
Thresette and everyone, thanks for joining us today as we talked about creating high performance cultures through diversity, which is really the differences that we all need to have, and to sharing them. So thanks for joining us. Next Global Business Leader Forum will be in January. So until then, on the other side of the holidays, everyone, have a great holiday season.
Happy holidays, everyone.